Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today's video is a story time video. I know it's been a month. I'm sorry. As you guys know, it's been busy around here for the past month or so. And anyway, I'm trying to get back into the swing of things. So we're going to start with the next episode, which is episode 10. And we're going to, I left off on chapter 14 of Little Women. Those of you that are new, and if you guys want to listen to the whole thing, you can go back to the first episode. I don't even remember how long ago that was. But a side note, please bear with me on the background noise on both the voiceover and also on the video. I am a mom. It's life here. So, you know, kids can't help it. And my older son is doing a tournament with a friend of his on his Xbox, so he might get a little loud, and I apologize in advance. So let's get started. Chapter 14, Secrets. Joe was very busy in the garret, for the October days began to grow chilly, and the afternoons were short. For 2 or 3 hours the sun lay warmingly in the high window, showing Joe seated on the old sofa, writing busily with her papers spread out upon a trunk before her, while Scrabble, the pet rat, promenaded the beams overhead, accompanied by his oldest son, a fine young fellow, who was evidently very proud of his whiskers. Quite absorbed in her work, Jo scribbled away till the last page was filled, when she signed her name with a flourish and threw down her pen, exclaiming, "There, I've done my best. If this won't suit, I shall have to wait till I can do better." Laying back on the sofa, she read the manuscript carefully through, making dashes here and there and putting in many exclamation points which looked like little balloons. Then she tied it up with a smart red ribbon and sat a minute looking at it with a sober, wistful expression, which plainly showed how earnest her work had been. Joe's desk up here was an old tin kitchen which hung against the wall. In it she kept her papers and a few books safely shut away from Scrabble, who, being likewise of a literary turn, was fond of making a circulating library of such books as were left in his way by eating the leaves. From this tin receptacle Jo produced another manuscript, and putting it in her pocket, crept quietly downstairs, leaving her friends to nibble on her pens and taste her ink. She put on her hat and jacket as noiselessly as possible, and going to the back entry window, got out upon a roof of a low porch, swung herself down to the grassy bank, and took a roundabout way to the road. Once there, she composed herself, hailed a passing omnibus, and rolled away to town, looking very merry and mysterious. If anyone had been watching her, he would have thought her movements decidedly peculiar for an alighting. She went off at a great pace till she reached a certain number in a certain busy street. Having found the place with some difficulty, she went into the doorway, looked up the dirty stairs, and after standing stock still a minute, suddenly dived on into the street and walked away as rapidly as she came. This maneuver she repeated several times, to the great amusement of a black-eyed young gentleman lounging in the window of the building opposite. On returning for the third time, Jo gave herself a shake, pulled her hat over her eyes, and walked up the stairs, looking as if she were going to have all her teeth out. There was a dentist sign, among others, which adorned the entrance, and after staring a moment at the pair of artificial jaws which slowly opened and shut to draw attention to a fine set of teeth, the young gentleman put on his coat, took his hat, and went down to post himself in the opposite doorway, saying with a smile and a shiver, "It's like her to come alone, but if she has had a bad time, she'll need someone to help her home." In 10 minutes Jo came running downstairs with a very red face and the general appearance of a person who had just passed through a trying ordeal of some sort. When she saw the young gentleman she looked anything but pleased, but she passed him with a nod. He followed, asking with an air of sympathy, "Did you have a bad time?" "Not very." "You got through quickly." "Yes, thank goodness." Why did you go alone? I didn't want anyone to know. You're the oddest fellow I ever saw. How many did you have out? Joe looked at her friend as if she did not understand him, then began to laugh as if mightily amused at something. There are two, which I want to have come out, but I must wait a week. What are you laughing at? You're up to some mischief, Joe, said Laurie, looking mystified. So are you. What were you doing, sir, up in that billiard saloon? Begging your pardon, ma'am. It wasn't a billiard saloon, but a gymnasium, and I was taking a lesson in fencing. I'm glad of that. Why, you can teach me. And then when we play Hamlet, you can be Laertes, and we'll make a fine thing of the fencing scene. Laurie burst out with a hearty voiced laugh, which made several passers-by smile in spite of themselves. I'll teach you whether we play Hamlet or not. It's grand fun and will straighten you up capitally. But I don't believe that was your only reason for saying I'm glad in that decided way, was it now? No, I was glad that you were not in the saloon because I hope you never go to such places. Do you? Not often. I wish you wouldn't. It's no harm, Joe. I have billiards at home, but it's no fun unless you have good players. So, as I'm fond of it, I come sometimes to have a game with Ned Moffat or some of the other fellows. Oh dear, I'm so sorry, for you'll get to liking it better and better, and will waste time and money and grow like those dreadful boys. I did hope you'd stay respectable and be a satisfaction to your friends, said Joe, shaking her head. Can't a fellow take a little innocent amusement now and then without losing his respectability? Asked Laurie, looking nettled. That depends on how and where he takes it. I don't like Ned and his set, and wish you'd keep out of it. Mother won't let us have him at our house, though he wants to come. And if you grow like him, she won't be willing to have us frolic together as we do now. Won't she? Asked Laurie anxiously. No, she can't bear fashionable young men, and she'd shut us all up in bandboxes rather than have us associate with them. Well, she needn't get out of her bandboxes yet. I'm not a fashionable party, and don't mean to be, but I do like harmless larks now and then. Don't you? Yes, nobody minds them, so lark away. But don't get wild, will you? Or there'll be an end of all of our good times. I will be double distilled saint. I can't bear saints. Just be a simple, honest, respectable boy, and we'll never desert you. I don't know what I should do if you acted like Mr. King's son. He had plenty of money, but didn't know how to spend it, and got tipsy and gambled and ran away and forged his father's name, I believe, and was altogether horrid. You think I'm likely to do the same? Much obliged. No, I don't. Oh dear, no. But I hear people talk about money being such a temptation, and I sometimes wish you were poor. I shouldn't worry then. Do you worry about me, Joe? A little. When you look moody and discontented, as you sometimes do, for you've got such a strong will. If you get once started, I'm afraid it would be hard to stop you. Laurie walked in silence for a few minutes, and Joe watched him, wishing she had held her tongue, for his eyes looked angry, though his lips smiled as if at her warnings. Are you going to deliver lectures all the way home? He asked presently. Of course not. Why? Because if you are, I'll take a bus. If you're not, I'd like to walk with you and tell you something very interesting. I won't preach any more, and I like to hear the news immensely. Very well, then. Come on. It's a secret, and if I tell you, you must tell me yours. I haven't got any, began Joe, but stopped suddenly, remembering that she had. You know you have. You can't hide anything. So up and fess, or I won't tell, cried Laurie. Is your secret a nice one? Oh, isn't it? About all about people you know and such fun. You ought to hear it, and I've been aching to tell it this long time. Come, you begin. You'll not say anything about it at home, will you? Not a word. And you won't tease me in private? I never tease. Yes, you do. You get everything you want out of people. I don't know how you do it, but you're a born wheedler. Thank you. Fire away. Well, I've left 2 stories with the newspaperman, and he's to give his answer next week, whispered Joe in her confident's ear. Hooray for Miss March, the celebrated American authoress, cried Laurie, throwing up his hat and catching again, to the great delight of 2 ducks, 4 cats, 5 hens, and a half a dozen Irish children, for they were out of the city now. Hush! It won't come to anything, I dare say, but I couldn't rest until I had tried, and I said nothing about it because I didn't want anyone else to be disappointed. It won't fail. Why, Joe, your stories are works of Shakespeare compared to the half rubbish that is published every day. Won't it be fun to see them in print? And shan't we feel proud of our authoress? Joe's eyes sparkled, for it is always pleasant to be believed in, and a friend's praise is always sweeter than a dozen newspaper puffs. Where's your secret? Play fair, Teddy, or I'll never believe you again, she said, trying to extinguish the brilliant hopes that blazed up at a word of encouragement. I may get into a scrape for telling, but I didn't promise not to, so I will. For I never feel easy in my mind till I've told you any plummy bit of news I get. I know where Meg's glove is. Is that all? Said Joe, looking disappointed, as Laurie nodded and twinkled with a face full of mysterious intelligence. It's quite enough for the present, as you'll agree when I tell you where it is. Tell then. Laurie bent and whispered 3 words in Joe's ear, which produced a comical change. She stood and stared at him for a minute, looking both surprised and displeased, then walked on, saying sharply, How do you know? Saw it. Where? Pocket? All this time? Yes. Isn't that romantic? No, it's horrid. Don't you like it? Of course I don't. It's ridiculous. It won't be allowed. My patience. What would Meg say? You are not to tell anyone. Mind that. I didn't promise. That was understood, and I trusted you. Well, I won't for the present anyway, but I'm disgusted and wished you hadn't told me. I thought you'd be pleased. At the idea of anybody coming to take Meg away? No, thank you. You'll feel better about it when somebody comes to take you away. I'd like to see anyone try it, cried Joe fiercely. So should I, and Laurie chuckled at the idea. I don't think secrets agree with me. I feel rumpled up in my mind since you told me that, said Joe rather ungratefully. Race down this hill with me and you'll be all right, suggested Laurie. No one was in sight. The smooth road sloped invitingly before her, and finding the temptation irresistible, Joe darted away soon, leaving hat and comb behind her and scattering hairpins as she ran. Laurie reached the goal first and was quite satisfied with the success of his treatment, for his Atlanta came panting up with flying hair, bright eyes and ruddy cheeks, and no signs of dissatisfaction in her face. I wish I was a horse, and then I could run for miles in this splendid air and not lose my breath. It was capital. But see, what a guy it's made me. Go pick up my things like a cherub as you are, said Joe, dropping down under a maple tree, which was carpeting the bank with some crimson leaves. Laurie leisurely departed to recover the lost property, and Joe bundled up her braids, hoping no one would pass by till she was tidy again. But someone did pass, and who should it be but Meg, looking particularly ladylike in her state and festival suit, for she had been making calls. What in the world are you doing here? She asked, regarding her disheveled sister with well-bred surprise. Getting leaves, meekly answered Joe, sorting the rosy handful she had just swept up. And hairpins, added Laurie, throwing a half a dozen into Joe's lap. They grow in this road, Meg. So do combs and brown straw hats. You've been running, Joe. How could you? When will you stop such romping ways? Said Meg reprovingly, as she settled her cuffs and smoothed her hair, with which the wind had taken liberties. Never till I'm stiff and old and have to use a crutch. Don't try to make me grow up before my time, Meg. It's hard enough to have you change all of a sudden. Let me be a little girl as long as I can. As she spoke, Joe bent over the leaves to hide the trembling of her lips, for lately she had felt that Margaret was fast getting to be a woman, And Laurie's secret made her dread the separation, which must surely come sometime, and now seemed very near. He saw the trouble on her face and drew Meg's attention from it by asking quickly, "Where have you been calling all so fine?" "At the gardener's," said Aunt Sally, "has been telling me all about Belle Moffat's wedding. It was very splendid, and they have gone to spend the winter in Paris. Just think how delightful that must be." "Do you envy her, Meg?" asked Laurie. "I'm afraid I do." "But I'm glad of it," muttered Joe, tying her hat with a jerk. "Why?" asked Meg, looking surprised. "Because if you care much about riches, you'll never go and marry a poor man," said Joe, frowning at Laurie, who was mutely warning her to mind what she said. "I shall never go and marry anyone," observed Meg, walking on with great dignity, while the others followed, laughing and whispering, skipping stones and behaving like children, as Meg said to herself, though she might have been tempted to join them if she had not had her best dress on. For a week or two Jove behaved so queerly that her sisters were quite bewildered. She rushed to the door when the postman rang, was rude to Mr. Brooke whenever they met, and would sit looking at Meg with a woebegone face, occasionally jumping up to shake and then kiss her in a very mysterious manner. Laurie and she were always making signs to one another and talking about spread eagles till the girls declared they had both lost their wits. On the second Saturday after Joe got out of the window, Meg, as she sat sewing at her window, was scandalized by the sight of Laurie chasing Joe all over the garden and finally capturing her in Amy's bower. What went on there? Meg could not see, but shrieks of laughter were heard, followed by the murmur of voices and a great flapping of newspapers. "What shall we do with that girl? She will never behave like a young lady," sighed Meg, as she watched the race with a disapproving face. "I hope she won't. She is so funny and dear as she is," said Beth, who had never betrayed that she was a little hurt at Joe's having secrets with anyone but her. "It's very trying, but we can never make her comme il faut," added Amy, who sat making some new frills for herself, her curls tied up in a very becoming way. Two agreeable things that made her feel uneasy and elegant and ladylike. In a few minutes Joe bounced in, laid herself on the sofa, and affected to read. "Have you anything interesting there?" asked Meg with condescension. "Nothing but a story. Won't amount to much, I guess," returned Joe, carefully keeping the name of the paper out of sight. "You'd better read it aloud. That will amuse us and keep you out of mischief," said Amy in her most grown-up tone. "What's the name?" asked Beth, wondering why Joe kept her face behind the sheet. "The Rival Painters." "That sounds well. Read it," said Meg. With a loud ahem and a long breath, Joe began to read very fast. The girls listened with interest, for the tale was romantic and somewhat pathetic, as most of the characters died in the end. "I like that about the splendid picture," was Amy's approving remark as Joe paused. "I prefer the lovering part. Viola and Angelo are two of our favorite names." "Isn't that queer?" said Meg, wiping her eyes, for the lovering part was tragical. "Who wrote it?" asked Beth, who had caught a glimpse of Joe's face. The reader suddenly sat up, cast away the paper, displaying a flushed countenance, and with a funny mixture of solemnity and excitement replied in a loud voice, "Your sister." "You?" cried Meg, dropping her work. "It's very good," said Amy critically. "I knew it! I knew it! Oh, my Joe, I'm so proud!" And Beth ran to hug her sister and exult over this splendid success. Dear me, how delighted they all were, to be sure. How Meg wouldn't believe it till she saw the words, "Miss Josephine March," actually printed on the paper. How graciously Amy criticized the artistic parts of the story and offered hints for a sequel, which unfortunately couldn't be carried out, as the hero and heroine were dead. How Beth got excited and skipped and sang with joy. How Hannah came in to exclaim, "Sakes alive, well, I never!" in great astonishment at that Joe's doings. How proud Mrs. March was when she knew it. How Joe laughed with tears in her eyes as she declared that she might as well be a peacock and done with it, and how the spread eagle might be said to flap his wings triumphantly over the house of March, as the paper passed from hand to hand. Tell us about it. When did it come? How much did you get for it? What will father say? Won't Laurie laugh? Cried the family all in one breath as they clustered about Joe, for these foolish, affectionate people made a jubilee of every little household joy. Stop jabbering, girls, and I will tell you everything, said Joe, wondering if Miss Burney felt any grander over her Evelina than she did over her rival painters. Having told how she disposed of her tales, Joe added, and when I went to get my answer, the man said he liked them both, but didn't pay beginners, only let them print in his paper and notice the stories. It was good practice, he said, and when the beginners improved, anyone would pay. So I let him have the 2 stories, and today this was sent to me. And Laurie caught me with it and insisted on seeing it, so I let him. And he said it was good, and I shall write more, and he's going to get the next paid for. I'm so happy, for in time I may be able to support myself and help the girls. Joe's breath gave out here, and wrapping her head in the paper, she bedewed her little story with a few natural tears, for to be independent and earn the praise of those she loved were the dearest wishes of her heart. And this seemed to be the first step toward that happy end. Chapter 15. A Telegram. November is the most disagreeable month in the whole year, said Margaret, standing at the window one dull afternoon looking at the frostbitten garden. That's the reason I was born in it, observed Joe pensively, quite unconscious of the blot on her nose. If something very pleasant should happen now, we should think it's a delightful month, said Beth, who took a hopeful view of everything, even November. I dare say, but nothing pleasant ever does happen in this family, said Meg, who was out of sort. We go grubbing along day after day without a bit of change and very little fun. We might as well be in a treadmill. My patience, how blue we are, cried Joe. I don't much wonder, poor dear, for you see other girls having splendid times while you grind and grind, year in and year out. Oh, don't I wish I could manage things for you as I do for my heroines. You're pretty enough and good enough already, so I'd have some rich relation leave you a fortune unexpectedly. Then you dash out as an heiress and scorn everyone who has slighted you. Go abroad and come home, my lady, something in a blaze of splendor and elegance. People don't have fortunes left to them in that style nowadays. Men have to work and women marry for money. It's a dreadfully unjust world, said Meg bitterly. Joe and I are going to make fortunes for you all. Just wait 10 years and see if we don't, said Amy, who sat in a corner making mud pies, as Hannah called her little clay models of birds and fruit and faces. Can't wait, and I'm afraid I haven't much faith in ink and dirt, though I'm grateful for your good intentions. Meg sighed and turned to the frostbitten garden again, and Joe groaned and leaned both elbows on the table in a despondent attitude, but Amy spatted away energetically, and Beth, who sat at the other window, said smiling, 2 pleasant things are going to happen right away. Marmee is coming down the street, and Laurie is tramping through the garden as if he had something to tell. In they both came, Mrs. March with her usual question, "Any letter from father, girls?" and Laurie to say in his persuasive way, "Won't some of you come for a drive? I've been working away at mathematics till my head is in a muddle, and I'm going to fasten my wits by a brisk turn. It's a dull day, but the air isn't bad, and I'm going to take Brooke home. So it will be gay outside, if it isn't out. Come, Joe, you and Beth will go, won't you?" "Of course we will." "Much obliged, but I'm busy." And Meg whisked out her work basket, for she had agreed with her mother that it was best for her, at least, not to drive often with a young gentleman. All right, I've lost my place, guys. Sorry. "We 3 will be ready in a minute," cried Amy, running away to wash her hands. Can I do anything for you, Mother? Asked Laurie, leaning over Mrs. March's chair with an affectionate look and tone he always gave her. No, thank you, except call at the office, if you'd be so kind, dear. It's our day for a letter, and the postman hasn't been. Father is as regular as the sun, but there's some delay on the way, perhaps. A sharp ring interrupted her, and in a minute after Hannah came in with a letter. It's one of them hard telegraph things, Mum, she said, handing it as if she was afraid it would explode and do some damage. At the word telegraph, Mrs. March snatched it and read the 2 lines it contained and dropped back into her chair as white as if the little paper had sent a bullet to her heart. Laurie dashed downstairs for water while Meg and Hannah supported her, and Joe read aloud in a frightened voice. Mrs. March, your husband is very ill. Come at once. S. Hale, Blank Hospital, Washington. How still the room was as they listened breathlessly. How strangely the day darkened outside, and how suddenly the whole world seemed to change as the girls gathered about their mother, feeling as if all the happiness and support of their lives was about to be taken from them. Mrs. March was again herself, directly, read the message over, and stretched out her arms to her daughter, saying in a tone they never forgot, I shall go at once, but it may be too late. Oh, children, children, help me to bear it. For several minutes there was nothing but the sound of sobbing in the room, mingled with broken words of comfort, tender assurances of help, and hopeful whispers that died away in tears. Poor Hannah was the first to recover, and with the unconscious wisdom she set all the rest a good example, for with her, work was a panacea for most afflictions. The Lord keep the dear man, and I won't waste no time a crying, but get your things ready right away, ma'am, she said heartily, as she wiped her face on her apron, gave her mistress a warm shake of the hand with her own hard one, and went away to work like 3 women in one. She's right. There's no time for tears now. Be calm, girls, and let me think. They tried to be calm, poor things, as their mother sat up, looking pale but steady, and put away her grief to think and plan for them. Where's Laurie? She asked presently, when she had collected her thoughts and decided on the first duties to be done. Here, ma'am. Oh, let me do something, cried the boy, hurrying from the next room whither he had withdrawn, feeling that the first sorrow was too sacred for even his friendly eyes to see. Send a telegram saying I will come at once. The next train goes early in the morning. I'll take that. What else? The horses are ready. I can go anywhere, do anything, he said, looking ready to fly at the ends of the earth. Leave a note at Aunt March's. Joe, give me that paper and a pen. Tearing off the blank side of one of her newly copied pages, Joe drew the table before her mouth, well knowing that money for the long, sad journey must be borrowed, and feeling as if she could do anything to add a little to the sum for her father. Now go, dear, and don't kill yourself driving at a desperate pace. There is no need of that. Mrs. March's warning was evidently thrown away, for 5 minutes later Laurie tore by the window on his own fleet horse, riding as if for his life. Joe, run to the rooms and tell Mrs. King that I can't come. On the way, get these things. I'll put them down, they'll be needed, and I must go prepared for nursing. Hospital stores are not always good. Beth, go and ask Mr. Lawrence for a couple of bottles of old wine. I'm not too proud to beg for father. He shall have the best of everything. Amy, tell Hannah to get down the black trunk. And Meg, come and help me find my things, for I'm half bewildered. Writing, thinking, and directing all at once might well bewilder the poor lady, and Meg begged her to sit quietly in her room for a little while and let them work. Everyone scattered like leaves before a gust of wind, and the quiet, happy household was broken up as suddenly as if the paper had been an evil spell. Mr. Lawrence came hurrying back with Beth, bringing every comfort the kind old gentleman could think of for the invalid and the friendliest promises of protection for the girls during the mother's absence, which comforted her very much. There was nothing he didn't offer, from his own dressing gown to himself as an escort. But the last was impossible. Mrs. March would not hear of the old gentleman's undertaking the long journey, yet an expression of relief was visible when he spoke of it, for anxiety ill fits one for traveling. He saw the look, knit his heavy eyebrows, rubbed his hands, and marched abruptly away, saying he'd be back directly. No one had time to think of him again till, as Meg ran through the entry with a pair of rubbers in one hand and a cup of tea in the other, she suddenly came upon Mr. Brooke. "I'm very sorry to hear of this, Miss March," he said in a kind, quiet tone, which sounded very pleasantly to her perturbed spirit. "I've come to offer myself as an escort to your mother. Mr. Lawrence has commissions for me in Washington, and it will give me a real satisfaction to be of service to her there." Down dropped the rubbers, and the tea was very near following, as Meg put out her hand with a face so full of gratitude that Mr. Brooke would have felt repaid for a much greater sacrifice than the trifling one of a time and comfort which he was about to take. "How kind you are! Mother will accept, I'm sure, and it will be such a relief to know that she has someone to take care of her. Thank you very, very much." Meg spoke earnestly and forgot herself entirely till something in the brown eyes looking down at her made her remember the cooling tea and lead the way into the parlor, saying she would call her mother. Everything was arranged by the time Laurie returned with a note from Aunt March, enclosing the desired sum, and a few lines repeating, what she had often said before, that she had always told them that it was absurd for March to go into the army, always predicted that no good would come of it, and she hoped they would take her advice the next time. Mrs. March put the note in the fire, the money in her purse, and went on with her preparations, with her lips folded tightly in a way which Joe would have understood if she had been there. The short afternoon wore away. All the errands were done, and Meg and her mother busy at some necessary needlework, while Beth and Amy got tea. Hannah finished her ironing with what she called a slap and a bang. But still Joe did not come. They began to get anxious, and Laurie went off to find her, for no one knew what freak Joe might take into her head. He missed her, however, and she came walking in with a very queer expression of countenance, for there was a mixture of fun and fear, satisfaction and regret in it, which puzzled the family as much as did the roll of bills she laid before her mother, saying with a little choke in her throat, "That's my contribution toward making father comfortable and bringing him home." "My dear, where did you get it?" $25, Joe. I hope you haven't done anything rash." "No, it's mine, honestly. I didn't beg, borrow, or steal it. I earned it, and I don't think you'll blame me, for I only sold what was my own." As she spoke, Joe took off her bonnet, and a general outcry arose, for all her abundant hair was cut short. "Your hair! Your beautiful hair! Oh, Joe, how could you? Your one beauty. My dear girl, there was no need of this. She doesn't look like my Joe anymore, but I love her dearly for it," as everyone exclaimed, and Beth hugged the cropped head tenderly. Joe assumed an indifferent air, which did not deceive anyone a particle. It said, rubbling up the brown brush and trying to look as if she liked it, "It doesn't affect the fate of the nation, so don't wail, Beth. It would be good for my vanity. I was getting too proud of my wig. It will do my brains good to have that mop taken off. My head feels deliciously light and cool, and the barber said I could soon have a curly crop, which will be a boyish, becoming, and easy to keep in order. I'm satisfied, so please take the money, and let's have supper." "Tell me all about it, Joe. I'm not quite satisfied, but I can't blame you, for I know how willingly you sacrificed your vanity, as you call it, to your love. But, my dear, it was not necessary. I'm afraid you'll regret it one of these days," said Miss March. "No, I won't," returned Joe stoutly, feeling much relieved that her prank was not entirely condemned. "What made you do it?" asked Amy, who would as soon have thought of cutting off her head as her pretty hair. "Well, I was wild to do something for father," replied Joe, as they gathered about the table, for a healthy young people can eat even in the midst of trouble. "I hate to borrow as much as mother does, and I knew Aunt March would croak, as she always does, if you ask for 9 pence. Meg gave all her quarterly salary toward the rent, and I got only some clothes with mine. So I felt wicked and was bound to have some money, if I sold the nose off my face to get it. You needn't feel wicked, my child. You had no winter things, and got the simplest with your own hard earnings, said Miss March, with a look that warmed Joe's heart. I hadn't the least idea of selling my hair at first, but as I went along I kept thinking what I could do, and feeling as if I'd like to dive into some of the rich stores and help myself. In a barber's window, I saw tails of hair with the prices marked, and one black tail, not so thick as mine, was $40. It came to me all of a sudden that I had one thing to make money out of, and without stopping to think, I walked in and asked if they bought hair, and what would they give for mine. I don't see how you dared to do it, said Beth in a tone of awe. Oh, he was a little man who looked as if he was merely lived to oil his hair. He rather stared at first, as if he wasn't used to having girls bounce into a shop and ask him to buy their hair. He said he didn't care about mine, and it wasn't the fashionable color, and he never paid much for it in the first place. The work put into it made it dear, and so on. It was getting late, and I was afraid if it wasn't done right away, that I shouldn't have it done at all. You know, when I start to do such a thing, I hate to give it up. So I begged him to take it, and told him why I was in such a hurry. It was silly, I dare say, but it changed his mind, for I got rather excited and told the story in my topsy-turvy way, and his wife heard and said kindly, "Take it, Thomas, and oblige the young lady. I'd do as much for our Jimmy any day if I had a spire of hair worth selling." Who was Jimmy? Asked Amy, who liked to have things explained as they went along. Her son, she said, who was in the army. How friendly such things make strangers feel, don't they? She talked away all the time the man clipped, and diverted my mind nicely. Didn't you feel dreadful when the first cut came? Asked Meg, with a shiver. I took a last look at my hair while the man got his things, and that was the end of it. I never snivel over trifles like that. I will confess, though, I felt queer when I saw the dear old hair laid on the table, and felt only the short rough ends of my head. It almost seemed as if I'd an arm or a leg off. The woman saw me look at it, and picked up a long lock for me to keep. I'll give it to you, Marmee, just to remember past glories, for a crop is so comfortable, I don't think I shall ever have a mane again. Mrs. March folded the wavy chestnut lock, and laid it away with a short gray one in her desk. She only said thank you, dearie, but something in her face made the girls change the subject, and talk as cheerfully as they could about Mr. Brooks' kindness, the prospect of a fine day tomorrow, and the happy times they would have when father came home to be nursed. No one wanted to go to bed when at 10 o'clock Mrs. March put by the last finished job and said, "Come, girls." Beth went to the piano and played father's favorite hymn. All began bravely, but broke down one by one, till Beth was left alone, singing with all her heart, for to her music was always a sweet counselor. "Go to bed and don't talk, for we must be up early, and shall need all the sleep we can get. Good night, my darlings," said Mrs. March, as the hymn ended, for no one cared to try another. They kissed her quietly, and went to bed as silently as if the dear invalid lay in the next room. Beth and Amy soon fell asleep in spite of the great trouble, but Meg lay awake, thinking the most serious thoughts she had ever known in her short life. Joe lay motionless, and her sister fancied that she was asleep, till a stifled sob made her exclaim, as she touched a wet cheek, "Joe, dear, what is it? Are you crying about father?" "No, not now." "What then?" My hair!" burst out poor Joe, trying vainly to smother her emotion in the pillow. It did not seem all that comical to Meg, who kissed and caressed the afflicted heroine in the tenderest manner. "I'm not sorry," protested Joe with a choke. "I'd do it again tomorrow if I could. It was only the vain part of me that goes and cries in this silly way. Don't tell anyone. It's all over now. I thought you were asleep, so I just made a little private moan for my one beauty. How came you to be awake? I can't sleep. I'm so anxious, said Meg. Think about something pleasant and you'll drop off soon. I tried, but felt wider awake than ever. What did you think of? Handsome faces, eyes particularly, answered Meg, smiling to herself in the dark. What color do you like best? Brown, that is, sometimes. Blues are lovely. Joe laughed, and Meg sharply ordered her not to talk, then amicably promised to make her hair curl, and fell asleep to dream of living in her castle in the air. The clocks were striking midnight, and the rooms were very still, as a figure glided quietly from bed to bed, smoothing a coverlet here, settling a pillow there, and pausing to look long and tenderly at each unconscious face, to kiss each with lips that mutely blessed, and to pray the fervent prayers which only mothers utter. As she lifted the curtain to look out into the dreary night, the moon broke suddenly from behind the clouds, and shone upon her like a bright, benign face, which seemed to whisper in the silence, Be comforted, dear soul. There is always light behind the clouds. Chapter 16, Letters. In the cold, gray dawn, the sisters lit their lamp and read their chapter with the earnestness never felt before, for now the shadow of a real trouble had come. The little books were full of help and comfort. As they dressed, they agreed to say good-bye cheerfully and hopefully, and send their mother on her anxious journey, unsaddened by tears or complaints from them. Everything seemed very strange when they went down, so dim and still outside, so full of light and bustle within. Breakfast at the early hour seemed odd, and even Hannah's familiar face looked unnatural as she flew about her kitchen with her nightcap on. The big trunk stood ready in the hall. Mother's cloak and bonnet lay on the sofa, and Mother herself sat trying to eat, but looking so pale and worn with sleeplessness and anxiety that the girls found it very hard to keep their resolution. Meg's eyes kept filling in spite of herself. Jo was obliged to hide her face in the kitchen roller more than once, and the little girls wore a grave, troubled expression, as if sorrow was a new experience to them. Nobody talked much, but as the time drew near and they sat waiting for the carriage, Mrs. March said to the girls, who were all busied about her, one folding her shawl, another smoothing out the strings of her bonnet, a third putting on her overshoes, and a fourth fastening up her traveling bag. Children, I leave you to Hannah's care and Mr. Lawrence's protection. Hannah is faithfulness itself, and our good neighbor will guard you as if you were his own. I have no fears for you, yet I am anxious that you should take this trouble rightly. Don't grieve and fret when I'm gone, or think that you can be idle and comfort yourselves for being idle and trying to forget. Go on with your work as usual, for work is a blessed solace. Hope and keep busy, and whatever happens, remember that you can never be fatherless. Yes, Mother. Meg, dear, be prudent. Watch over your sisters. Consult Hannah. And, and in any perplexity, go to Mr. Lawrence. Be patient, Jo. Don't get despondent or do rash things. Write to me often and be my brave girl, ready to help and cheer all. Beth, comfort yourself with your music and be faithful to the little home duties. And you, Amy, help all you can, be obedient, and keep happy, safe at home. We will, Mother, we will. The rattle of an approaching carriage made them all start and listen. There was the hard minute, but the girls stood it well. No one cried, no one ran away, or uttered a lamentation, though their hearts were very heavy as they sent their loving messages to Father, remembering, as they spoke, that it might be too late to deliver them. They kissed their mother quietly, clung about her tenderly, and tried to wave their hands cheerfully when she drove away. Laurie and his grandfather came over to see her off, and Mr. Brooke looked so strong and sensible and kind that the girls christened him Mr. Greatheart on the spot. "Goodbye, my darlings. God bless and keep us all," whispered Mrs. March as she kissed one dear little face after the other and hurried into the carriage. As she rolled away, the sun came out, and looking back, she saw it shining on the group at the gate like a good omen. They saw it also, and smiled and waved their hands, and the last thing she beheld as she turned the corner was the four bright faces, and behind them, like a bodyguard, old Mr. Lawrence, faithful Hannah, and devoted Laurie. "How kind everyone is to us," she said, turning to find fresh proof of it in the respectful sympathy of the young man's face. "I don't see how they can help it," returned Mr. Brooke, laughing so infectiously that Mrs. March could not help smiling. And so the journey began with the good omens of sunshine, smiles, and cheerful words. "I feel as if there had been an earthquake," said Joe, as their neighbors went home to breakfast, leaving them to rest and refresh themselves. "It seems as if half the house was gone again," added Meg forlornly. Thank you for listening. This is the end of this episode.